Imagine winning $62 million in the lottery, and keeping it a secret from everyone, even your own family. That's exactly what happened to me, and I can tell you, it was both exciting and terrifying. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Carla Thompson. I'm 38 years old, living in Ohio, and for most of my adult life, I worked hard just to make ends meet. I had a small apartment, a reliable car, and a job that paid the bills but left little room for comfort. Every month felt like a balancing act, and I often worried about how to cover unexpected expenses. My family was always around, but instead of supporting me, they seemed to expect me to support them. My mom, Linda, had a way of reminding me of how much she had sacrificed for me, while my dad, George, would complain about money quietly, hoping I'd notice. My younger brother, Ethan, had a habit of asking for help with anything from rent to car repairs, and my sister, Rebecca, often hinted at favors she thought I owed her. Despite all this, I was content. I worked hard, and I knew my efforts mattered, even if my family didn't always see it. But life took a dramatic turn one quiet Tuesday morning when I checked my lottery ticket and realized I had won $62 million. The numbers on the ticket matched perfectly, and at first, I thought I was dreaming. My heart raced, my mind spun, and for a few minutes, I couldn't breathe. I had a choice to make: do I share this life-changing news or keep it to myself? I decided to keep it a secret. I wanted to enjoy the win quietly, without changing my relationships overnight or letting anyone manipulate me. I opened new accounts, hired a financial advisor, and started thinking carefully about how I would spend the money. My plan was simple: secure my future, enjoy some comforts, and make sure I was financially independent before anyone else found out. For weeks, life went on normally. My family carried on with their usual requests, completely unaware of my newfound fortune. I smiled politely, offered small assistance when it didn't cost me much, and watched how they navigated their own struggles. But deep down, I knew the secret I carried was fragile. One wrong move, one careless word, and everything could come crashing down. Then it happened. One afternoon, my family gathered in the living room, and they started talking about a big project they wanted me to help with. I could feel the tension in the room as they laid out their plan, expecting me to say yes without hesitation. My stomach tightened. This request wasn't just ordinary, it was huge, potentially life-changing for them, and it would test my loyalty in ways I hadn't faced before. I smiled, nodded, and promised to think about it, even though I was already planning how to handle the situation without giving away my secret. That moment marked the beginning of a journey I could never have imagined, a journey of trust, betrayal, and the careful balancing act of protecting myself while navigating the people I loved the most. After winning the lottery, I started making small changes in my life quietly. I moved into a nicer house, bought a reliable car, and began investing money so it would grow safely. I didn't flaunt anything. I wanted to enjoy my freedom without causing jealousy or suspicion. Life felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without constant worry about bills or unexpected expenses. I even started planning little treats for myself, things I had always dreamed of but could never afford before. But my family didn't notice, or maybe they just ignored, the changes in my life. What they did notice was the same old pattern: financial stress. My mom would casually mention that bills were tight, my dad would complain about repairs or the cost of living, and my brother Ethan would always find a way to hint that he needed money for something important. My sister Rebecca, too, had subtle ways of suggesting I could help her with small emergencies. At first, I listened and felt a small tug of guilt, remembering all the times my family had sacrificed for me, or at least claimed they had. Ethan, in particular, was exhausting. He had borrowed money before and never paid it back, yet he acted like he was the responsible one in the family. He assumed I would continue bailing him out, just like before. I could see the pattern clearly now. Their requests weren't about real need, they were about entitlement. The more they asked, the more I understood that I needed to protect myself. One afternoon, my mom brought up the past again, listing all the ways the family had helped me or sacrificed for me when I was younger. Her words were meant to make me feel guilty, and for a moment, I felt it, but only briefly. I had learned to separate their guilt trips from reality. I could see that my family's love was often mixed with expectation, and that realization made me both sad and determined. Despite their hints and complaints, I stayed calm. I smiled, nodded, and made polite excuses when they asked for money. Inside, I was quietly planning my next steps. I knew I couldn't let myself be trapped by their demands. My wealth was my safety net, my ticket to freedom, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me, not even my own family. But the pressure was building. Their constant hints and requests were pushing me, testing my patience without them even realizing it. I felt a small storm brewing inside me, a mix of anger, disappointment, and the determination to act wisely. I knew that soon, I would face a moment where I would have to make a choice, give in and risk being used again, or stand firm and assert control over my life. And that moment was coming faster than I expected. The family's requests were escalating, and I could feel their entitlement growing. I smiled to myself, knowing that when the time came, I would handle it in a way they could never see coming. I finally decided to help Ethan when he came to me one evening, looking worried and desperate. He claimed he needed money to cover an urgent car repair, and at first, I hesitated. I warned him clearly that this would be the last time I could help without seeing a plan to pay me back. He promised he would be responsible, and I reluctantly handed over the money, hoping he would understand the trust one was placing in him. A week later, I discovered he had spent the money on a weekend getaway and expensive gadgets instead. When I confronted him, he lied and tried to justify his actions, saying he deserved a break after everything he had been dealing with. I felt a sharp sting of betrayal. The trust one had given him so easily had been thrown aside, and in that moment, it became painfully clear that my family assumed I would always come through for them, no matter what. I felt torn. On one hand, I loved my family deeply. They were the people who had been there for me, in small ways and sometimes in big ways, over the years. But on the other hand, I was angry, frustrated, and disappointed. I realized that my generosity had been taken for granted, and that my willingness to help had been seen not as an act of care, but as a guarantee that I would continue to bail them out. The mix of love and resentment inside me was overwhelming. Instead of reacting angrily, I decided to approach the situation with caution. I began setting subtle boundaries, testing how much my family actually valued me beyond my money. I started giving measured responses, saying maybe or let me think about it instead of an immediate yes. I asked questions that made them explain their plans and intentions before offering any help. It was a small, quiet form of revenge, but it allowed me to regain control without confrontation. I also began observing more closely. I watched how Ethan reacted when I hesitated or asked him to show responsibility. I noticed the impatience in his eyes, the sense of entitlement that bubbled beneath his polite words. It made me realize just how much my family relied on me not as a person, but as a source of money and comfort. Despite the small measures I put in place, Ethan wasn't done testing me. A few days later, he came to me again, this time asking for a much larger sum, confident that I would not refuse him. His tone was casual, almost arrogant, as if the previous betrayal didn't matter at all. I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. This request wasn't just a test of generosity, it was a test of my patience, my boundaries, and my ability to protect myself. And I knew then that my next move would be crucial. I had to decide whether to give in once more or finally assert the limits I had been quietly preparing. The choice I made would set the stage for what came next in a family dynamic filled with manipulation, expectations, and hidden truths. After Ethan's last request, things in the house changed. My family became bolder, using every tactic they could think of to get what they wanted. There were constant guilt trips, emotional appeals, and even subtle threats. My mom, Linda, had a way of looking at me with that pleading expression, reminding me how much the family had sacrificed, how I owed it to them to help. My dad's comments were quieter, but they carried weight too, he would sigh over bills or hint at opportunities that needed funding. Even Rebecca had her own strategies, casually bringing up dreams that I could make happen for them if I just said yes. Then my mom hit me with the biggest request yet. She wanted me to invest in a family project, a business idea that sounded legitimate at first but quickly revealed itself as a way for them to get my money. They painted it as a chance for the whole family to thrive, but I could see the flaws clearly. The plan was risky, and the money they asked for was far more than anyone should reasonably contribute. I felt the pressure, but I also knew I couldn't fall for it. I started approaching their requests like a game, carefully considering every word and action. Outwardly, I appeared thoughtful, nodding, asking questions, and pretending to weigh their ideas seriously. But in my mind, I was planning my own moves. I was mapping out exactly how to protect myself, how to make sure my wealth stayed secure, and how to keep them from taking advantage of me again. I also began journaling my feelings. Each evening, I wrote about the years I had felt overlooked or undervalued, about the moments when I had been used or ignored, and about the frustration that had built up inside me. Writing helped me see patterns clearly and reminded me of my own strength. I realized that my family's manipulations weren't about love, they were about control. The more I understood this, the more determined I became to take control of my own life. Quietly, I built a safety net. I moved money into accounts and investments that were completely out of their reach. I kept careful records and ensured that nothing could be accessed without my knowledge. It was empowering, knowing that I had a secure foundation no one could touch. This wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my independence and protecting myself from being used again. Even as I did this, my family's requests escalated dramatically. They were asking for more money, more favors, and bigger commitments, each one bolder than the last. Their sense of entitlement grew, and I could feel the tension building in every interaction. I knew that soon, I would have to confront the situation more directly, and the choices I made next would determine whether I could finally take control or remain trapped in the cycle of manipulation. The stage was set, and I felt a mix of fear, determination, and anticipation. I had to act carefully, because one wrong move could tip everything, and I wasn't about to let them take advantage of me ever again. After weeks of being pressured, I decided it was time to start saying no more often. I didn't refuse aggressively, I used small excuses instead. Sometimes I said I needed to think about it, other times I pretended my finances were tied up in other matters. Each time, I watched my family's reactions closely. Their frustration was obvious, but they had no idea why I was holding back. Observing them became almost like a game. I noticed patterns in how they acted when I denied requests. Ethan grew impatient quickly, trying to charm or guilt me, while Rebecca became quiet, sulking or dropping subtle hints that I was being unfair. My mom tried to appeal to my conscience, telling stories about sacrifice and family loyalty, while my dad stayed silent but gave pointed looks, clearly disappointed. It was revealing, every single one of them showed weaknesses, selfish tendencies, and a willingness to manipulate if it meant getting what they wanted. I felt guilty at first. Saying no was hard, especially when it was my family asking. But slowly, I began to see my own value. I realized I had spent too many years bending to their needs, letting them take advantage of me. This was my chance to set boundaries, and it was necessary, even if it caused temporary tension or disappointment. For the first time, I felt a sense of power and control that wasn't tied to their approval. I also decided to test their intentions a little. When Ethan or Rebecca asked for advice about money or investments, I started giving misleading tips, harmless, but enough to see how serious they were about thinking for themselves. Sometimes I suggested ideas that were too complicated or risky, just to watch their reactions. They always treated it like they could follow my lead blindly, never questioning whether I was trustworthy. Each time, it confirmed what I already knew, they wanted my help without putting in effort of their own. Even with my cautious approach, I began noticing subtle signs that my secret wasn't completely safe. Ethan and Rebecca exchanged looks, asked questions that seemed probing, and tried to hint at knowledge they shouldn't have. They didn't have proof, but I could tell they suspected something was different about me. Their curiosity and growing suspicion made me more careful, but it also gave me a quiet thrill. I was the only one in control, and they were starting to realize it. The tension in the house was growing. Every request, every conversation carried a hidden test. I could feel the shift in power, and it was exhilarating. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their demands, I was planning, observing, and slowly taking control of the situation. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that my next steps would determine whether I stayed in charge or let them manipulate me again. Things took a serious turn when my family began pushing their limits. Their requests were no longer small favors or casual loans, they were asking for massive sums of money, suggesting I risk my wealth for their benefit. At first, I tried to stay calm and polite, but I knew I had to draw a line. I refused, explaining that I couldn't commit such amounts and that it would put my future at risk. The refusal didn't go over well. Anger and resentment quickly replaced the polite tones they usually used with me. My mom's eyes flashed with disappointment, Ethan's expression turned sharp and demanding, and Rebecca's quiet frustration was almost unbearable to witness. It was clear they had never truly considered my feelings or my limits. They had assumed my support was unlimited, and now they were faced with a reality they weren't ready to accept. That's when Ethan crossed a dangerous line. He tried to access my bank accounts and personal finances, thinking he could get what he wanted behind my back. It was a calculated move, and the betrayal cut deep. I couldn't believe it. After everything, he assumed I was careless enough to let him take advantage of me again. The sense of hurt and disappointment I felt was overwhelming. It wasn't just the money, it was the realization that family loyalty had been one-sided all along. I sat down and thought carefully about my next move. I knew I couldn't react impulsively or create a scene. Instead, I began devising a strategy to protect myself and teach them a lesson. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions without embarrassing them in public or creating unnecessary drama. It was about control, boundaries, and making sure they could never misuse my generosity again. I started by tightening every part of my financial life. I added security measures, set up protections, and made sure that no one could access my wealth without my knowledge. Every request, every hint, every manipulation would now be met with a careful response. I would respond calmly, with intelligence and strategy, letting them feel the consequences of their assumptions. At the same time, I began planting seeds of awareness. Small hints, subtle refusals, and careful observations allowed me to understand how desperate they were becoming. I noticed their frustration growing, their nervous glances, and the subtle arguments that started popping up between them. They were beginning to sense a change in me, and I could feel their panic growing. For the first time, I realized that the power dynamic in our family was shifting. They had assumed I would always be available, always forgiving, always generous. Now, for the first time, they faced someone who had limits, who had control, and who would not allow manipulation to succeed. The tension in the house was thick, and I knew the coming days would test all of us in ways none of us were ready for. After Ethan's attempt to access my accounts, I knew I had to take full control of my finances. I began investing my money wisely, choosing safe options that would grow steadily over time. I also created strong legal protections, making sure nothing could be touched without my consent. On top of that, I set up secret accounts that no one in my family could find. For the first time, I felt completely secure, like my wealth was truly my own, untouchable by anyone else. With my financial life secured, I turned my attention to the family. I started observing them more closely, noticing every reaction, every word, and every subtle gesture. I began to manipulate interactions quietly, testing their intentions and watching how they behaved when I refused favors or gave only partial answers. It was fascinating, and a little sad, to see how differently they acted when they realized I wasn't the same person who would automatically say yes. In the evenings, I reflected on everything I had been through. I thought about the years of being used, of feeling invisible until money was involved, and of being taken for granted by the people I loved most. It hurt more than I expected, and yet, as I wrote in my journal and planned my next steps, I felt a deep sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was in control. I wasn't letting anyone manipulate me, and I wasn't giving away my hard-earned peace. That realization gave me strength I hadn't felt in years. My revenge wasn't about anger or cruelty, it was psychological. I began withholding help strategically, only offering support when it aligned with my rules and boundaries. I let my family's greed become obvious, watching them scramble and argue when they realized I wasn't an endless source of money. Each request I declined or delayed taught them a lesson without me ever having to raise my voice. It was subtle, quiet, and effective. The most interesting part was watching them turn on each other. Ethan and Rebecca began arguing about who needed my help more, blaming each other for mismanaging small amounts of money, and questioning whether Carla, the quiet, giving sister, had really changed. Even my parents got drawn into the tension, wondering aloud what was going on and why I had suddenly become so cautious. The family that had once pressured me constantly was now nervous, unsure, and divided. The house, which had always been filled with expectation and entitlement, had become tense and unpredictable. Every conversation carried hidden stakes, and I could see how my subtle moves had shaken the foundation of their assumptions. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the more they fought over my wealth, the more I remained in control. They had no idea how much I had prepared, how carefully I had built my safety net, and how strong I had become. The stage was set. The family was scrambling, and I was calm. I knew the next steps would test not just my patience but the limits of their greed, and I was ready for it. The tension in the house reached a breaking point. Small disagreements turned into loud arguments, and every conversation somehow led back to money or favors I had refused to provide. My family, used to taking my generosity for granted, was suddenly confronted with the reality that it would not come automatically. Ethan and Rebecca tried to come up with schemes to get what they wanted, sneaky plans, half-truths, and subtle manipulations, but each attempt backfired. I stayed calm, letting them struggle, knowing that their own actions were exposing their true nature. One afternoon, my mom confronted me directly. Her voice was sharp, filled with frustration and disbelief, as she demanded answers about why I was being so difficult. For the first time, I looked her in the eye and spoke calmly, firmly, and without anger. I explained that I had always been there for the family, that I had supported them in countless ways, and that it was not fair to assume I would always be at their disposal. I told her how it felt to be taken for granted, to have my care and effort treated as an obligation rather than appreciated. The room went silent. My words hit harder than anything I could have said in anger. For the first time, my family realized that I was independent, that I was no longer a source of endless support, and that their selfishness had consequences. Ethan and Rebecca's faces fell as they understood that their attempts to manipulate me had failed. Even my dad looked uneasy, finally seeing the truth in what I was saying. Their arrogance and entitlement were laid bare in front of each other, creating an emotional humiliation that no amount of excuses could fix. It wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense, it was about truth and accountability. I had shown them that I had limits, that I could protect myself, and that I would not allow my generosity to be used against me. Watching them confront their own mistakes and realizing they had misjudged me gave me a quiet sense of satisfaction. For the first time, the family dynamic shifted. I wasn't the one bending to fit their expectations, I was in control, and they were forced to face it. Even as I felt vindicated, I knew the situation wasn't completely resolved. Emotional ties remained, and the bonds of family are never simple. There were still conversations to navigate, subtle tensions to manage, and decisions to make about who deserved trust going forward. The anger and frustration in the house were tangible, but so was a newfound respect, whether they admitted it or not. I walked through my home that evening feeling a strange mix of relief, strength, and cautious optimism. I had finally established my independence, protected my future, and revealed the truth about my family's selfishness. Yet, I knew I couldn't let my guard down completely. While the immediate chaos had passed, the real challenge now was maintaining boundaries without losing the connections I still valued. The family had learned a lesson, but the story wasn't entirely over, and I was ready for whatever came next. After the chaos settled, I decided to help my family only when it was truly necessary. No more blind generosity, no more automatic yes. If someone had a genuine need and was willing to put in effort, I would support them. But I made it clear that favors had limits, and I expected responsibility in return. Slowly, my family began to understand that I was serious this time. Their attempts to manipulate me were no longer effective, and they realized they couldn't take my support for granted. It was a slow process, but boundaries became part of our daily life. I was careful about who I trusted and how much I offered, watching for signs of honesty and effort. When someone showed they were willing to work for what they needed, I helped, but always on my terms. For the first time, I felt a true balance between generosity and self-respect. I wasn't giving out of obligation, I was choosing to help, and that choice made all the difference. Rebuilding trust with my family wasn't easy. There were moments of tension and doubt, especially after everything that had happened. But I stayed patient, firm, and consistent. Over time, I saw glimpses of change. Ethan started to take responsibility for his actions, Rebecca learned to ask for help without expecting it automatically, and even my parents began respecting my limits. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and it reinforced the power of standing firm while remaining compassionate. Emotionally, the journey was exhausting. I grieved for the innocence I had lost, the trust one once had in my family that was broken by selfishness and manipulation. It hurt to realize that people I loved could act so thoughtlessly. Yet, alongside that grief, I felt an immense sense of wisdom and empowerment. I had learned to protect myself without giving up my heart entirely. I had discovered the strength to enforce boundaries, to recognize true intentions, and to value my own worth above the demands of others. With that clarity, life became calmer. I could finally enjoy my wealth and freedom without guilt or fear of being taken advantage of. Decisions that used to weigh heavily on me were now easier because I knew where my limits were and how to maintain them. Every dollar, every choice, and every moment of my independence felt earned and secure. I realized that true freedom wasn't just financial, it was emotional. I had gained control over my life, my choices, and my peace of mind. The weight of being constantly used was lifted, replaced with a quiet confidence and a sense of fulfillment. I felt empowered in a way I never had before, knowing that I could enjoy my success and still care for those who deserved it, without being drained by entitlement or manipulation. For the first time, I felt fully at peace. I had my independence, my security, and my dignity. I had survived betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. I was free to live life on my terms, and that freedom was priceless. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized just how far I had come. The journey had been full of betrayal, manipulation, and testing moments that pushed me to my limits. But through it all, I had learned patience, careful strategy, and how to protect myself while still showing care when it was deserved. Each challenge, each difficult choice, taught me something important about who I was and what I would no longer tolerate. I thought a lot about my family, about love, loyalty, and trust. I understood now that love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. Boundaries aren't walls, they are a way to protect what is important and to keep relationships healthy. I had learned the hard way that people may act selfishly, even those closest to you, and that it was my responsibility to recognize that and act wisely. It was a lesson in strength, independence, and careful discernment. My revenge, if it could even be called that, wasn't about cruelty or humiliation. It was about teaching lessons in a quiet, controlled way and ensuring that I could no longer be taken advantage of. I watched my family confront their own actions, their greed, and their assumptions, and it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. I had proven that I wasn't just a source of money or support, I was a person with limits, intelligence, and control over my life. Emotionally, I felt a mixture of grief and relief. I grieved the trust and innocence I had lost over the years, but I also felt relief in realizing that I had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, wisdom, and the freedom to make decisions for myself. I knew I had the power to choose who earned my help and who did not, and that choice made me stronger than I had ever been. I also felt hope. I understood now that boundaries and caution didn't have to mean isolation. I could still build genuine connections with people who respected me and my limits. I could still share my life, my experiences, and even my wealth when it was deserved, without fear of being used. This was a new way of living, one where I was free, empowered, and cautious, but still open to meaningful relationships. In the end, I realized that the most important thing I had gained wasn't money, it was myself. I had lost the illusion of family loyalty, but I didn't lose myself, and that was worth more than $62 million. I felt free, wiser, and capable of navigating life with clarity. I knew I would always carry the lessons of the past with me, guiding my choices and protecting my peace, but also allowing space for those who truly valued me to share in my life. It was a powerful, quiet triumph, one I would never take for granted.